My boyfriend of 5 years refused to propose to me and humiliated me in front of his family. If the milk is free, why would I pay for the cow? Now go graze. Everyone laughed and no one defended me. Before continuing the story, let us know in the comments which city you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so you won't miss more stories, and leave your like on the video. I didn't plan to cry. Not in front of them. Not in that room with the too bright chandelier and the smell of overcooked meat and perfume. But the truth is, I didn't cry. I smiled. That brittle, stretched lip kind of smile that hurts your cheeks more than your heart. And I sat there, in that dining room chair, in the middle of the laughter, the clinking of glasses, the casual cruelty. If the milk is free, he said, grinning so wide I could see the filling on his molar, why would I pay for the cow? And then he looked at me, mock-pitying, eyes shining with the delight of being the center of attention. Now go graze! The table erupted. His father let out a bark of laughter. His aunt actually clapped. His sister covered her mouth like she couldn't believe it, but kept laughing anyway. And not one person, not one, said a word in my defense. I wasn't shocked. That was the worst part. I didn't gasp or freeze or feel a sting behind my eyes. I just sat still, holding my wine glass, fingers tight around the stem, watching their faces twist with amusement like I was a character in a sitcom and not a real person with real feelings. And in that strange silence inside my head, one thought rose above everything else. It's over. Not because he said something cruel. He'd said worse in private, though never quite so publicly dismissive. Not because they laughed. I'd given up expecting warmth from them years ago. No, it was because I finally saw it clearly. There was no ambiguity left to hide in. No way to explain it as a joke, or deflect with a smile, or tell myself he's just uncomfortable with big gestures. The fog had lifted. He'd never marry me. He didn't want to. He never had. And worse, he didn't respect me. Maybe he never had. I excused myself politely, said I needed the restroom. No one stopped me. Why would they? The joke had already passed. They'd already moved on to a debate about football and someone's third engagement. I walked down the hallway, past the wedding photos that lined their walls. All those smiling couples in matching outfits, eyes bright with promise. His cousin had just gotten married last spring. Big ceremony. Live band. Sparkler send-off. I helped plan it. I made the flower centerpieces by hand. I locked myself in the bathroom and stared at my reflection. There was lipstick on my teeth. I wiped it away and leaned in closer. Not to cry, just to look. To really see myself. My hair was too flat from the humidity, and I had a faint crease under my left eye from laughing too hard earlier in the day. He made me laugh then. He really did. He could be charming when he wanted to be. And funny. And soft, in those private moments when no one else was around. But tonight wasn't a fluke. It wasn't a slip. It was a confession. A truth said aloud, cloaked in laughter. I stood there for a long time. So long that someone knocked, probably thinking I'd passed out or fallen in. I flushed the toilet out of habit and washed my hands, just to do something with them. Then I walked back down the hall. I didn't rejoin the table. I told him I wasn't feeling well. He barely looked up from his plate. You good to drive? He asked, mouth full. I nodded. He nodded back. That was it. I didn't leave out of anger. That's important. I wasn't furious. I wasn't even hurt. Not in the usual way. It felt more like recognition, like finally seeing something that had been there all along. There was no drama in it, no screaming, just a quiet kind of decision, final and absolute. I drove home in silence, the kind that feels like company. Our house, my house, was still dark when I arrived. He wouldn't be back for hours. He always stayed late when his family gathered. Too much wine to drive, he used to say. Though by then I suspected he just preferred being away from me. I didn't pour myself a drink, didn't sit on the couch with a blanket and spiral into self-pity. Instead, I went to the closet and pulled out a box I'd tucked away months earlier. Not full of memories, but of documents, copies of the deed, mortgage statements, my pay stubs, emails from our realtor. All the paperwork that had my name, and only my name, on it. I hadn't started collecting them with any grand plan. It began after a conversation we'd had one night in the kitchen, when I asked, carefully, gently, if he still saw marriage in our future. He laughed, not in a mean way, just like the idea was mildly ridiculous. Why would we mess with something that's already working? That was his answer. Like we were a wireless plan or a household appliance. After that night, I started noticing things differently. Every bill in my name, every holiday planned by me, every dinner, every grocery run, every repair call. I started keeping track, not obsessively, but with growing awareness, like a scientist slowly realizing the variables in an experiment. And now the experiment was complete. He'd provided the final data point tonight, without even knowing. Now go graze. He said it, out loud, in front of everyone. It wasn't just the insult, it was the ease with which he said it, the pride in it, as if I'd given him nothing valuable, as if 5 years of my life were just material for a funny anecdote. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was upset, but because I didn't want to lose the clarity. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff and realizing the fall wouldn't hurt, because I'd already been building wings. The next morning, I made coffee. I fed the dog. I sat at the kitchen table and made a list. Everything I would need to do, not to dramatically storm out, but to end it properly, completely, on my terms. I'd been preparing without realizing it. Now I just needed to execute. And this time, I wouldn't say a word beforehand. There would be no fight, no negotiation, no final chance for him to make promises he'd never keep. He didn't believe I'd ever leave. That was his biggest mistake. Let him keep laughing. I'd already taken the first step out the door. He moved in 2 years after we started dating. That part always surprises people. They assume we lived together from the beginning, but no. He had his own place for a while. A studio apartment in a building with no elevator, where the pipes rattled every time someone used the water upstairs. I used to joke that it sounded like a ghost was trying to escape from the walls. He complained about that place constantly, said it felt like a box with bad lighting and thin walls. I didn't mind it so much. It had character, stories to tell if you listened closely. But when my lease ended, and I mentioned maybe looking for a bigger place, something with an actual yard, he said, "Let's do it together." I remember that day clearly. We were sitting in his car, parked outside a sandwich shop, half-eaten lunch on our laps. He said it like it was the most natural progression in the world, like we were already building a life, and this was just the next logical step. We searched listings for weeks. Every Sunday, we drove through neighborhoods with signs out front, imagining our future behind each door. I was the one taking notes, scheduling viewings, asking about taxes and heating systems. He mostly commented on paint colors and whether the backyard was grill-worthy. When we finally found the house, a pale green ranch style with hardwood floors and a deck that caught the afternoon sun, I fell in love with it immediately. It felt safe, quiet. Something about the way the windows faced west made the living room glow in the evenings. We put in an offer the next day. Well, I did. He didn't qualify for the mortgage. That was the beginning of the first quiet compromise. I never told anyone, not even my closest friends. When people asked whose name the house was in, I'd smile and say ours, because it felt easier than explaining. Because I didn't want to make him feel diminished. He said he'd catch up later. That once he paid off his student loans and got a promotion at work, we'd refinance and add his name to the title. He said it with such confidence, like he genuinely believed it. So I believed it too. It wasn't supposed to be permanent. I told myself that repeatedly. He didn't have much to bring when he moved in. Just clothes, a few books, and a beat-up recliner that never made it past the garage. I bought most of the furniture. The couch, the dining table, the mattress, every dish, every towel, every light bulb. I picked it, paid for it, arranged it. And still, I told myself it didn't matter. That those things were just objects. That love wasn't about who paid for what. We split groceries. Sometimes. Mostly I covered them. At first it was small things. He'd say, "Can you grab it this time? I left my card at home." Or, "I'll get it next week." But next week always came with a reason. And eventually, I stopped asking him to reimburse me. When the roof needed repairs, I paid. When the washing machine broke, I called the technician and covered the bill. When we needed a new water heater, he said, "Let me know what I owe you," but never followed up. There was always a logic behind it. He wasn't being deliberately negligent. He was figuring things out. His job was going through transitions. He was working on a side project. He was waiting for a bonus. I wanted to believe him. More than that, I wanted us to work. I grew up watching my mother manage everything. She handled the bills, the house, the kids, while my father worked late and expected dinner to be ready when he walked in. I told myself I wouldn't become her, that my relationship would be more equitable. But equity isn't about splitting receipts 50-50. It's about effort, mutual investment, the sense that you're both showing up with whatever you have, ready to build something together. What we had wasn't that. It looked like partnership on the surface, but underneath, the foundation was always tilted. I used to tell myself that love is about generosity, that if I just gave a little more time, a little more understanding, he'd eventually meet me halfway. But halfway kept moving. It was always just one step further than I could reach. He'd tell his friends that we'd bought a house together. He liked that phrase. He'd say it with pride. And I never corrected him because part of me wanted it to be true. Part of me was still waiting for the version of him that made promises in the car over half-eaten sandwiches. But time doesn't pause just because you're waiting for someone to catch up. The days kept moving forward, and I kept investing money, energy, care, while he coasted on the assumption of balance. Sometimes, I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling fan turning slow circles, and wonder what would happen if I stopped compensating, if I just stopped covering the gaps. Would he notice? Would he step up? Or would he even stay? It wasn't resentment, not yet. It was a quiet kind of erosion, like wind wearing down stone. You don't feel it happening. But one day, you look down and realize the ground beneath your feet isn't solid anymore. He still talked about the future. Vacations we'd take, renovations we'd make, dogs we'd adopt. But when I mentioned things that required actual planning, marriage, shared finances, legal documents, he'd smile and say, "Let's not rush things," as if 5 years was a sprint. And the worst part? I accepted it. I smiled back. I made myself smaller so he could feel more comfortable. I rationalized, excused, deflected, because admitting the truth felt too painful, too final. I wasn't in a relationship with delayed commitment. I was in a one-sided arrangement, and I was the only one actually building anything at all. It's easy to lose track of how much you're carrying when you pick things up one at a time. A bill here, a late-night grocery run, an oil change appointment, tracking the property tax schedule, managing the insurance renewal, replacing the smoke detector batteries, ordering the new water filters, fixing the cabinet door that kept falling off its hinges, setting up the holiday decorations, then taking them down and storing them properly because no one else would. It all becomes background noise, tasks you absorb without thinking, and every time I noticed something that needed doing, I did it. Automatically, quietly, like it was just part of the atmosphere of being in a relationship. Love expressed through logistics. He wasn't completely unhelpful. That's what made it harder to recognize the imbalance. He took out the trash. Sometimes he folded laundry. Sometimes he cooked, usually on weekends, and always the same 3 meals. He played with the dog in the backyard and mowed the lawn when I reminded him. He liked saying we were partners, especially when other people were around. But what we had wasn't partnership. It was proximity. I was running a household. He was just living in it. The mortgage was in my name. So was the deed. So were all the utilities. Every payment came from my account. At the beginning, he offered to cover the internet and streaming subscriptions. It sounded fair. He called it his contribution. But as time passed, even that became inconsistent. Some months, I'd get an email saying the card on file was declined. I'd fix it without comment, chalking it up to oversight. We had a system for splitting groceries, one of those shared apps where you log receipts. I logged everything meticulously. He didn't. I reminded him gently. He'd say, "Oh, right, I'll catch up this weekend." He never did. When I bought new furniture, I called it ours. When I rearranged the living room, I asked for his opinion. When something broke, I asked if he wanted to help pick the replacement. He always said, "Whatever you think is best." At first, it felt supportive. After a while, it just felt like indifference. Our bedroom furniture? I bought all of it. The mattress? I paid in full. The curtains? The rugs? The bed frame? Me. I told myself it didn't matter, that eventually it would all blur together under the label of ours. But there was no ours, just mine, and a person who existed inside it like a guest with permanent privileges. We had friends who'd visit and compliment the house. They'd say things like, "You two have done such a great job with this place." He'd smile proudly, as if he'd chosen the wall colors or installed the shelving in the pantry. I'd nod and say thank you. He never gave me credit, not once, and I never asked for it. Not because I didn't want recognition, but because I was afraid of how empty the silence might sound if I did. Some nights I'd sit at the kitchen table and look around at everything I'd created. The houseplants thriving in their corners, the artwork on the walls, the soft lamp in the hallway that turned on at sunset, thanks to a smart plug I'd installed myself, all the details I'd cared enough to curate. And I'd realize he could disappear tomorrow and not one thing in that space would bear his fingerprint. There was no evidence of his investment, only his presence. And yet, he acted like he belonged to it, like the house was an extension of his comfort. He'd tell his friends they could crash at his place. He called the backyard my grill zone. He'd invite people over without asking, then retreat to the bedroom while I cleaned, prepared snacks, and played hostess. He liked comfort. He liked convenience. He liked being taken care of. And I, God help me, I provided all of it. Not because I was weak or desperate, but because I thought that's what love looked like. I thought consistency would eventually earn commitment. It didn't. Whenever I brought up finances, he got uncomfortable. If I suggested combining our money or opening a joint account, he'd say, "That's a big step." When I asked if he wanted to discuss long-term planning, he'd joke that I was trying to turn us into a corporation. I once left a spreadsheet open on my laptop, accidentally, but maybe not really. It tracked every home expense from the past year: mortgage, repairs, insurance, maintenance, even cleaning supplies. I'd organized it by category and month. His name didn't appear once. He saw it. He said nothing. He wasn't cruel about any of this. That's what made it so confusing. He didn't yell or gaslight or manipulate in obvious ways. He just didn't step up. And somehow, that was worse, because it left me nothing clear to push against. No obvious fight to have, just the slow suffocation of unspoken imbalance. There were moments I tried to convince myself I was overreacting, that I was being petty, keeping mental ledgers, that this is just how relationships work. Someone always carries more. That someday we'd level out. But love shouldn't feel like bookkeeping. It shouldn't require you to maintain a mental inventory of fairness just to stay sane. And fairness, real fairness, isn't about 50-50 splits. It's about reciprocity. It's about care being mutual, about someone seeing your effort and matching it in their own way. He didn't see, or maybe he did, and simply didn't care. I remember one night, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, and thinking, if I disappeared tomorrow, what would actually change for him? He had no skin in the game, no real investment, not emotional, not financial, not legal. He lived in a house that wasn't his, surrounded by furniture he didn't buy, eating food he didn't purchase, with a woman he had no intention of marrying. And I let him, for years. Not because I was naive, but because I wanted so desperately to be loved that I ignored every sign that I was just being used. I used to think he was just cautious about commitment, that maybe he needed more time, more security, more confidence in us before taking the next step. Some people do fear marriage. I understood that. I didn't want to pressure him. I told myself that love is patient. But there's a difference between being patient and being ignored. And somewhere along the way, I stopped being a partner and became a convenience. The first time I brought up getting married, it wasn't even a real conversation. It was just a quiet moment while folding laundry. When I said, almost casually, "Do you ever think about what our wedding would look like?" He smiled, kissed my forehead, and said, "Why would I mess with perfection?" I laughed. At the time, I thought it was sweet, charming even. He had this way of making non-answers sound affectionate. I let it go. I let a lot of things go back then. Over the years, I asked again, maybe 4 or 5 times total. Always gently, always giving him space to be honest, and every time he found a way to deflect. Let's wait until we're more financially stable. Let's enjoy things the way they are. Marriage doesn't really change anything. Anyway, it's just a piece of paper. Funny how people who call it just a piece of paper are always the ones who benefit from not signing it. I wasn't just asking for a wedding. I was asking for commitment, for recognition, for acknowledgement that I wasn't just a convenience in his life. But the more I tried to have those conversations, the more evasive he became. Whenever things got serious, he'd redirect. If I brought up practical matters, like making sure he was on healthcare forms or emergency contact lists, he'd say, "Is this about the house again?" With that tone, like I was being transactional, as if I hadn't already funded everything in that house, from the foundation to the soap in the guest bathroom. And when I brought up adding his name to the deed, the promise he'd made when we bought the place, he'd wave it off. "Let's not complicate things," he'd say. He never actively pursued being added. That's what stuck with me. He never once showed genuine interest in making that change official. It was always on me to bring it up, on me to push for progress, on me to question why nothing ever moved forward. I started realizing that he wasn't afraid of commitment. He just didn't want to risk losing what he had, a life funded and organized by someone else. without the burden of legal or financial responsibility. He enjoyed all the benefits of a committed relationship: stability, a beautiful home, companionship, someone who cared for him, without ever having to promise anything in return. And the moment I asked for more security, he acted like I was trying to trap him. The most telling moment came one night while we were watching a romantic comedy. Nothing too deep, just mindless entertainment. But the main character proposed at the end, in front of all their friends. The audience in the movie applauded. I glanced over at him, curious about his reaction. He rolled his eyes. I asked what that was about. He said, "Public proposals are so manipulative." I didn't say anything. I just nodded. But inside, something clicked. That wasn't just about the movie. That was how he saw me. Every time I asked for clarity, for partnership, for a future, I wasn't trying to have a conversation. In his mind, I was trying to manipulate him. That's not love. That's entitlement wrapped in charm. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. It changed how I heard everything. The casual way he'd say, "Let me know if you need anything from the store," like groceries magically appeared because of my paycheck. The way he'd say, "Don't stress about it," whenever a bill was due, because he wasn't the one paying it. The way he'd say, "It's your house," whenever something broke, but our home when guests were over. He wanted the illusion of a shared life, without any of the structure that required effort or sacrifice. He was comfortable exactly where he was, and the idea of changing that, even in a way that honored the years we'd spent together, was simply inconvenient. I realized I had been asking the wrong question all along. It wasn't, "Why won't he propose?" It was, "Why would he?" He had no incentive to change anything. I cooked, I cleaned, I paid the mortgage, I handled the emotional labor, I carried the weight. And in return, he gave me just enough affection, just enough attention, just enough vague future talk to keep me hoping. He wasn't malicious, but he was perfectly fine with me being unhappy, as long as I stayed. And the truth was, I had stayed. I stayed through birthdays where I planned the dinner, bought the gift, and covered the bill. I stayed through holidays spent at his family's house, where I was always just the girlfriend, even after 5 years. I stayed through job changes, financial stress, medical scares, his health issues, not mine, and I always showed up, always gave. But he never once said, "Let's talk about what you need." Not once. The last time I brought up marriage, it wasn't even intentional. We were in the kitchen, loading the dishwasher after dinner. I made an offhand comment about how we still hadn't figured out logistics for if we ever had kids, who'd handle school pickup, walk the dog during long days. He didn't laugh. He just said, "We don't need a contract to prove anything." And that was it. 5 years boiled down to we don't need a contract. I went upstairs and sat in the bedroom, surrounded by the things I'd chosen, the furniture I'd paid for, the home I had built from scratch. And I realized I wasn't in love anymore. I wasn't even disappointed. I was done. He thought I was waiting for a ring. I wasn't. Not anymore. I was waiting for a reason to leave. And deep down, I think I knew he'd eventually give me one. By the time his words reached across that dinner table, "Now go graze," I had already done most of the mental work. The thing people never understand about leaving is that it doesn't start when you walk out the door. It starts months before, in moments no one notices. In quiet searches conducted after midnight. In files saved with names like miscellaneous documents or April records. In phone calls made during lunch breaks. In the way you stop unpacking all the groceries and instead start mentally calculating how many bags would fit in your car. He had no idea how much I'd already detached. Not just emotionally, practically. It started small. I quietly removed my name from subscriptions we both used, saying I wanted to streamline my accounts. I opened a separate savings account at a different bank. I told him it was for budgeting purposes. He barely looked up from his phone. Then I started reviewing my paperwork. I checked my credit report. I reread the deed carefully, line by line, making sure every document was clear about ownership. I gathered proof of purchase for furniture, every maintenance receipt, every improvement I'd funded. I built a paper trail, a wall of facts to protect me from any revisionist history later. There's a particular kind of power in preparing without warning. I started taking photos of the house, room by room, not for nostalgia, but for documentation. Where things were, what I owned, what I had paid for. I backed up important files. I changed passwords on accounts that were solely mine. I stopped sharing certain calendars. I started researching moving companies that offered discreet services. I remember sitting in my car one morning before work, listening to a podcast about strategic business exits. And I thought, this is the same principle. A relationship like ours was a contract in disguise. Only one of us had been honoring the terms. I met with a lawyer. Quietly. I didn't need to file anything dramatic. I just wanted information. I wanted to know what options I had if he tried to contest ownership of anything that wasn't his. The lawyer reviewed my documentation and said, "You're well protected." That's smart, not paranoid. I kept track of dates, each time I tried to talk to him about our future, each time he dismissed the conversation, each refusal to engage with fundamental questions about our life together. It wasn't petty record keeping. It was documentation. So when the time came, I wouldn't question my memory. I wouldn't doubt myself. And then I started looking at apartments. Not far away. I didn't want to flee the city or hide. I just wanted a space that was mine again. A place untouched by shared compromises and unbalanced history. I found one. A one-bedroom near my office with clean lines, quiet neighbors, and tall windows that let in morning light. I toured it on a Saturday when he thought I was at the gym. The moment I stepped inside, I could breathe differently. I didn't sign the lease immediately. I waited, watched, measured how I felt each time he asked me to order takeout because he forgot his wallet, or when I paid for another repair bill while he nodded absently in the background, distracted by his phone. I tracked my growing resentment like monitoring a slow fever, and I realized it wasn't going down. So I signed. I chose a move-in date 3 weeks after his family's next dinner. I didn't plan it that way consciously, but maybe some part of me knew the facade would crack soon, that I was approaching the moment where I'd stop asking for something different and start acting like I deserved it. I arranged time off work, not to quit, but to request flexibility for personal transitions. My boss didn't ask for details. She just nodded and said, "About time." I didn't tell my friends yet. I wanted this to feel real before anyone else put their interpretation on it. The last thing I needed was someone asking, "Are you sure you're not overreacting?" I'd spent 5 years being unsure about my own feelings. I hired movers for early morning. I arranged a small storage unit. I scheduled utility transfers for everything in my name: gas, electricity, water, internet. I wrote out a detailed inventory of what I would take and what I would leave behind. I didn't want arguments later. I didn't want chaos. Every item was accounted for. Every decision was deliberate. Every step was documented. And then I waited. I waited for the final moment that would make staying impossible. I didn't know it would happen like that he would use a room full of his relatives to mock me publicly, that I'd become the punchline in my own life story. But when it happened, I didn't panic. I watched. I memorized every smirk, every careless glance around the table. I filed it away like the last piece of evidence I needed. By then, I already knew exactly what I would do the next morning. I'd wake up before dawn. I'd pack the final few bags I'd hidden under the bed. I'd let the movers in and walk them through the house, room by room. I'd take only what was legally and morally mine, down to the last fork. I'd change the locks. I'd leave a folder on the counter, documents, receipts, a copy of the deed, an itemized list of everything left behind. He would come home to absence, not a fight, not a dramatic note, just absence. I wouldn't block his number. I wanted him to call, to text, to realize what had happened, not out of cruelty, but because he needed to understand what happens when someone you've taken for granted finally stops waiting. I didn't hate him. I still don't. But I hated what I had allowed myself to become, and I was done pretending I didn't see it. The morning after the dinner, I woke before my alarm, not groggy or disoriented, just awake, the kind of clarity that doesn't leave room for dreams or doubt. I stared at the ceiling for a moment, then rolled out of bed and put both feet on the floor like I was stepping into something irreversible. He was still asleep, sprawled diagonally across the mattress, mouth slightly open, one arm hanging over the side like he didn't have a care in the world. That used to make me smile. Now it just looked like someone occupying space he'd never earned. I moved quietly, but not from guilt, from efficiency. The bags I'd packed days earlier were still hidden under the guest bed, zipped and ready. I took them out one by one, lined them by the front door. I folded the throw blankets from the couch, unplugged the lamp in the corner, emptied the drawer that held my chargers, notebooks, important papers. Everything I touched, I had already decided on weeks ago. There was no hesitation. No, should I leave this? It was all itemized. All mine. I didn't take a single thing that didn't belong to me. Not a sock, not a coffee mug. That was crucial. This wasn't revenge. This was resolution. The movers arrived at 6:45 a.m., exactly as scheduled. 2 men and a woman, polite and efficient. I greeted them with what probably looked more like exhaustion than a smile. "Everything marked with blue tape comes with me," I said, showing them the simple map I'd drawn of the house. Every room had been categorized, every object sorted. The movers barely needed to ask questions. They moved like people accustomed to cleaning up after other people's endings. While they worked, I had the locks changed. I'd scheduled a locksmith for 7:30. He arrived early, probably used to these kinds of jobs. Didn't ask questions when I handed him the old keys and pointed to the door. By 8 a.m., the house was mine in every legal sense. I left his belongings in the guest room, folded, organized, labeled clearly. I wasn't cruel. I didn't dump them in bags or hide anything out of spite. I wanted no reason for him to claim I'd been irrational or emotional. Every item he legitimately owned was waiting for him, untouched and accounted for. I left a folder on the kitchen counter. Inside were photocopies of the deed, mortgage statements, and the original purchase agreement. I included a letter, not an explanation or goodbye, just facts. A line-by-line list of what I'd taken, what I'd left, and contact information if he needed anything retrieved later. I signed it with my full name, like a business transaction. I didn't leave my new address. At 9:12 a.m., I closed the front door behind me and walked to my car. The sun had just crested over the neighborhood rooftops. The street was quiet except for the distant sound of someone starting their morning routine. My phone buzzed, a text from the leasing office at my new apartment. Keys were ready for pickup. I pulled out of the driveway for the last time, glanced once in the rearview mirror, and felt nothing. Not sadness, not relief, just completion. I didn't cry when I reached the new apartment. The space was smaller, simpler, still unfurnished, but it felt expansive in a way that surprised me, like a room where I could finally hear my own thoughts without interference. I placed my bags against the wall and sat cross-legged on the hardwood floor, watching sunlight spill through the clean windows. It felt honest, plain and warm and mine. He didn't call right away. That surprised me. I expected a text within the hour, some version of "Where are you?" or "What the hell is this?" But the silence stretched through the morning. I imagined him waking slowly, shuffling into the kitchen expecting coffee and conversation, realizing something was off. No sounds, no bag by the door, no routine to fall into. I imagined the slow panic rising as the reality dawned. When he finally called that afternoon, I let it ring. Then again. Then a text. "Where are you? What is this?" Another call. Then, "Are you seriously doing this like a damn thief in the night?" I turned the phone face down and opened a box labeled "Kitchen Essentials," started putting dishes away in my new cabinets. More texts followed over the next few hours. The tone shifted quickly, confusion to annoyance to sarcasm, then indignation. The same man who'd told a roomful of people that I was a cow not worth buying was now accusing me of being dramatic, of making things harder than they need to be. I didn't reply. I didn't owe him my attention anymore. Not my explanations, not my emotional labor. He didn't get to act confused now. I'd been communicating for years, just not in words he bothered to hear. By evening, the messages took a different turn. He started bargaining. "We should talk. This doesn't feel like you. You're overreacting. Let's be adults about this. Let me explain. You don't just leave like this." But I did just leave, and it felt exactly like me, maybe for the first time in years. That night, I made pasta in a borrowed pot. Ate sitting on the floor, drank water from a mason jar, and felt more satisfied than I had in months. The next morning, I woke up in a room where everything belonged to me, even the silence. I checked my phone. 5 missed calls, 1 voicemail. His voice, tired and smaller than usual, saying my name like it carried weight, asking me to just come home. But I was home, and I had no intention of going back. He didn't show up that first day, which half surprised me. I expected the kind of dramatic, wrinkled shirt confrontation he usually reserved for poor customer service or parking tickets. But he didn't come. Maybe he didn't know where to look. Maybe he was still convincing himself this was just anger, that I'd walk back through the door and laugh it off. Like all the other times, I'd swallowed my needs to keep the peace. But I had nothing left to swallow. The silence only lasted 24 hours. The next evening, the messages turned frantic. "You're not answering. Are you okay? Where the hell are you? This isn't funny anymore. You took things that aren't yours. That's theft. You realize that, right? That last one made me laugh out loud. In my little kitchen with its empty drawers and smell of fresh paint, I laughed so hard I had to sit down. I hadn't taken his things. I had taken my life back. By day 3, he started calling from different numbers. He even created a new email address, as if I wouldn't recognize the tone. A mixture of guilt, false concern, and passive threats. My favorite was, "I know you're probably going through something. I get it. Just don't do anything irreversible. We can fix this." As if I had broken something fragile and precious, not escaped from a system built entirely around my labor. Then came the calls to mutual friends. The indirect messages filtered through people who hadn't spoken to me in months, suddenly sliding into my inbox saying, "He's really worried. Maybe you should just meet him for closure." Closure was a word people used when they didn't want to admit there was nothing left to close. I didn't reply to them either. But the real unraveling didn't start until he went back to the house. I don't know exactly what he expected to find. Maybe an angry note, some trail of petty destruction, something he could use to play the victim. What he found instead was order, silence, a folder on the counter with documents he couldn't dispute, and a list of his belongings neatly accounted for. That's when the careful facade cracked. The tone of his texts changed completely. No more manipulation or false sweetness. "You really think you can do this without consequences? You're not better than me. You just had better credit. You're a coward." A manipulative, heartless coward. Then silence again. Then the calls to his family began. Apparently, the same people who had laughed at his joke, the milk and cow and grazing, didn't find it quite so amusing once the fallout arrived at their doorstep. His sister reached out first. A single message. "You could have at least warned us." Warned them of what? That I wasn't going to keep being their unpaid domestic help with no title, no respect, and no seat at their table? He must have spun them some version where I abandoned him, where I overreacted, where I left without warning. But they knew. All of them. They'd seen it in the way he spoke to me, the way he dismissed my words, the way he showed up empty-handed to every family event while I brought the dessert, the wine, and the polite smile that held everything together. They knew. They just didn't care, until the house wasn't available for him to host in anymore. He went back a second time with his brother to collect the rest of his belongings. I wasn't there, obviously. I had arranged everything through a third-party company that verified the pickup. I left behind only what legally belonged to him. Clothes, electronics, items with receipts in his name. Still, he tried to claim things that weren't his. The coffee table, the bedroom mirror, the wireless speakers, a floor lamp I'd bought with my first bonus 3 years earlier. When the company refused to release those items, he threatened legal action. They asked for proof of purchase. He had none. Then came the voicemail that showed me exactly who he really was. His voice, angrier this time, strained and righteous, rattled through the speaker like a rehearsed speech. "You made a huge mistake. You think this makes you look strong? It makes you look bitter, selfish. No one's going to side with you when they find out what you really did. You walked away from something good, from someone who loved you. But love without respect isn't love. It's convenience. It's habit." I deleted the message and turned off my phone for the rest of the day. That night, I took a walk through my new neighborhood. The air smelled like damp leaves and faint cigarette smoke. I passed a small park, quiet except for the sound of someone dribbling a basketball in the distance. No one knew me here. No one expected anything from me. For the first time in years, I wasn't performing a role, not being the supportive girlfriend, or the one who holds it all together, or the reasonable one. I was just myself. I wasn't sad. I wasn't proud. I was free. He kept spiraling for weeks after that. More texts, empty threats, the occasional plea wrapped in anger. "Just talk to me. You owe me that much." But I didn't owe him anything. He'd had years to listen, years to meet me halfway, years to build something real together. And he chose comfort over commitment, convenience over growth. Now, for the first time, he was living with the consequences of his own choices. I wasn't the milk. I wasn't the cow. I wasn't grazing in anyone's pasture. I had been feeding him a complete life every single day, and now, finally, he was starving. He didn't stop trying, even after all the calls, emails, and failed property claims, not after the locksmith or the legal silence. About a month after I left, a mutual acquaintance reached out. Someone I hadn't spoken to in almost a year. Someone who had always played neutral, floating between social circles like Switzerland in human form. She asked if I'd consider sitting down just once to talk, not to reconcile, not to make up, just to clear the air. At first, I almost deleted the message, but something about the phrasing stuck with me, to set the record straight. That's exactly what she wrote, and maybe that's what I wanted too. Not for closure, but for clarity. I agreed. On my terms. Public place, neutral ground, mid-afternoon. I gave the time, the location, and the boundaries. 1 hour, one conversation, nothing more. He showed up 5 minutes late, wearing the same jacket he'd worn the night he made the joke. I noticed immediately. I wondered if it was intentional, an attempt to trigger something familiar, to rewind the clock. If it was, it didn't work. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, just diminished. Like someone who hadn't been sleeping well, who had spent weeks realizing too late that he wasn't nearly as indispensable as he'd assumed. He didn't smile. He didn't start with small talk. He sat down across from me at the cafe table and leaned forward like he was expecting a fight. I didn't give him one. "I just want to understand," he said finally, "why you had to make it so dramatic." That was his word. Dramatic. I didn't flinch. I had come prepared, not emotionally, but with documentation. I opened the folder I'd brought and slid it across the table. Inside were copies of everything: the mortgage, the title, all utilities in my name, receipts for furniture, services, maintenance, repairs, every expense categorized by date and amount. I had screenshots of texts where I'd offered to include him in financial decisions, to discuss balance, to share responsibility fairly. I didn't say a word while he looked through it. I just watched. He flipped through the pages slowly, slower than I expected. At one point he looked up, like he was about to argue, but the words died in his throat. There was nothing to dispute. Every line was documented. When he finally closed the folder, his expression had shifted. Less defensive, more confused. "You really kept track of all this?" "I had to," I said, "because I knew, eventually, you'd try to rewrite history." He leaned back, arms crossed. "It wasn't that one-sided." I didn't respond immediately. Just let the silence sit there between us until he had to squirm under it. "You didn't think it was one-sided," I said, "because it worked. For you." He opened his mouth again, then shut it. For the first time, maybe ever, he didn't have a comeback ready. The conversation moved slowly after that. He asked questions that weren't really questions, statements wrapped in denial. "I thought we were happy." "You thought I was happy," I corrected. "I didn't think you'd just disappear." "I didn't disappear. I removed myself from an unbalanced situation. You could have talked to me first." I did, for 5 years. Every answer was calm, controlled, detached. I didn't need to raise my voice. The facts were louder than anything I could say. Eventually, he shifted tactics. "You know I loved you." "No," I said. "You loved what I provided. You loved the version of me that asked for nothing in return." That landed harder than I expected. He blinked, looked away. For a moment, I thought he might actually apologize. Not performatively, not to win points, but genuinely. But instead, he said, "You embarrassed me in front of everyone." I felt something that might have been a smile tug at the corner of my mouth, not a kind one. "I humiliated you?" I asked, leaning in slightly. "You did that yourself. I didn't make the joke, I didn't laugh, I didn't call myself a cow and you too smart to pay. That was all you. I just decided not to stay in the pasture you put me in." He went quiet after that. Really quiet. The server came by. He didn't order anything. I paid for my coffee, out of habit, not spite, and stood to leave. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't need to. I left him sitting there with a folder full of proof and a silence full of consequences. The conversation hadn't been about healing. It had been about reflection, about setting the weight of truth down in the middle of the table and walking away from it lighter. Later that evening, I got a message from someone in his family. I don't know who gave them my number, but it wasn't hard to guess. The tone was accusatory. "You blindsided him. You made him look like a fool. He made himself look like a fool." I saved the message, filed it with the rest, a reminder that some people confuse enabling with loyalty, that they'd rather defend a son, a brother, a friend, even when the evidence contradicts their story, than face uncomfortable truths about how little he actually contributed. But I wasn't interested in making anyone understand anymore. I had said what needed saying, and finally, I didn't care if they heard it. The pickup was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. He didn't want to go through the company I'd used before. He said it was too formal, like I was treating him like a stranger. I almost reminded him that strangers tend to treat each other with more basic respect than we had by the end. But I kept that observation to myself. No energy left for arguments that only existed to preserve his ego. Instead, I let him choose how it would happen, within strict limits. I agreed to be present for the collection of his remaining belongings. A short, final interaction. Supervised, documented. 1 hour maximum. I wasn't nervous, just ready. There was a sense of ceremony to it, almost clinical, like returning keys to a landlord after moving out. Not sad, not angry, just complete. He arrived 10 minutes late, naturally. Same car, same posture, as if he thought maybe I'd soften when I saw him, like the sight of his familiar hands in his pockets. His practiced slouch might trigger some old reflex of care. It didn't. I was past reflexes. I stood in the front hallway while he stepped inside. He looked around like a tourist visiting a place he used to know. His eyes moved slowly across the empty rooms. The couch was gone. The bookshelves were bare. Even the curtains had been replaced. He looked unsettled, like the house had already erased him. It had. I pointed toward the guest room where I had placed everything he still had any claim to. I had grouped it all together methodically, folded, boxed, labeled with his name. It looked impersonal, temporary, a life reduced to a few containers and bags. He didn't thank me. Instead, he wandered, peering into other rooms, almost as if hoping to find something I'd missed. He lingered near the bedroom door, glanced at the walls where we used to keep framed photos. The nail holes were still there. The frames were not. "This feels surreal," he said finally. I didn't respond. I had nothing left to narrate for him. He'd already written the ending himself. He opened a box marked personal items, then one labeled electronics. Then he got to the stack of smaller things: bathroom supplies, kitchen gadgets, old charging cables he barely used. That's where the problem started. "Where's my Bluetooth speaker?" "Purchased by me," I replied. "Receipt in my name, it's not on the approved list." He looked at me like he expected me to cave, to make an exception. I didn't blink. "And the cast iron skillet?" "Gift from my sister, 3 years ago, not yours." He scoffed. "You're really going to keep cookware like it's treasure?" "No," I said calmly. "I'm keeping what belongs to me." He went quiet again, but I could see the frustration building. Not because he actually cared about the speaker or the skillet, but because he was realizing how little of our shared space had ever actually belonged to him. It kept happening, one item after another. Things he assumed were his, things he had used, touched, treated as communal property, denied. Not because I was being spiteful, but because they were never his to begin with. "You really documented everything," he muttered, flipping through the itemized list I had printed and attached to the final box. I didn't respond. He knew I had. That was the part he couldn't reconcile. That I had done this work, all of it, right down to the final inventory. That I had been prepared in ways he never thought necessary. He sat on the edge of the now bare guest bed and rubbed his jaw. "Feels like I don't have anything left." I didn't say it, but I thought it. "You never built anything to begin with." He looked up, eyes tired. "What am I supposed to do now?" It wasn't really a question. It was a confession. That's when I saw it fully. The hollow space behind all that bluster. The man who had drifted through 5 years of someone else's effort, and now had nothing to show for it but bags of clothes and toiletries in Ziploc bags. He started asking about things he couldn't take. The wall-mounted TV, the dining chairs, the area rug in the living room. All of them were mine. I had invoices, credit card statements, email receipts. "I remember picking this rug out with you," he said. "Yes," I replied. "And then I paid for it. You said you'd send me your half. You never did." He stared at it for a long time. "It still feels like part of me." "It's not. Not anymore." He didn't argue further. I think, deep down, he knew. He just hadn't expected to see it laid out so plainly. That after years of talking like a co-owner, he was leaving with only what he'd brought in. Less, even. When the hour was up, I walked him to the door. He paused there, looking back one last time, like the house might say something on his behalf. But houses don't lie. They hold what you give them. And he'd given this one nothing. He picked up the last box and stepped outside. "Guess that's it," he said, forcing a half smile. "It was always going to be," I said. "You just didn't want to believe it." He stood there a moment longer, as if waiting for a hug, or a shared memory, or maybe one last gift of understanding. I gave him nothing. I closed the door. locked it. On the other side, I heard the sound of cardboard scraping against the porch railing, a frustrated sigh, then footsteps, then silence. I walked back inside and looked around the empty rooms. It wasn't just a house anymore. It was a space that had finally exhaled. The letter came 2 weeks later. Not from him. He'd stopped texting by then, at least directly. This was from a law office. The envelope was thick, official-looking, with a return address in a part of town I recognized immediately. His family's area. Established money. Older influence. A name I didn't recognize printed in elegant script above the firm's logo. But I didn't need to know the lawyer's name to guess who had paid the retainer. Inside, the tone was almost comical in its formality. Legal jargon stacked on legal jargon, sentences bloated with hereby and whereas, attempting to create weight out of air. They claimed shared occupancy rights, contributions in kind, and, my personal favorite, implied co-ownership via extended domestic partnership. I laughed. It wasn't bitter, just tired. The kind of laugh you let out when you've already done all the homework, and someone else is just now realizing you weren't bluffing. They were trying to establish grounds for a case, not for actual ownership, but for leverage, hoping I'd be intimidated enough to compromise, to settle, to give back something that was never theirs to begin with. I read each page carefully, highlighted every phrase that attempted to twist my 5 years of investment into a shared achievement. Then I pulled up my files, the folder I had maintained meticulously. I printed copies, mortgage documents, utility bills, every receipt, screenshots of text messages where I'd offered to add him to the deed. His replies, always evasive, let's talk later. Not a good time. No rush, right? Messages where he acknowledged he hadn't paid me back for various expenses. Notes from our realtor, clearly stating I was the sole applicant and qualified borrower. Then I called my lawyer. He wasn't surprised. Families like his always try this, he said, flipping through the threatening letter. They don't like losing face. They'll frame economic reality as injustice just to avoid admitting it was irresponsibility. I let him handle the response. It was short, precise, and legally airtight. A line-by-line rebuttal, attached with all necessary documentation, including a signed declaration from me affirming that all cohabitation had been informal, uncontracted, and supported entirely by my income and assets. We sent it out that same week. I requested a delivery confirmation. It came back the next morning. After that, the tone shifted dramatically. They tried again, this time with less legal posturing and more emotional manipulation. Another letter, this one handwritten, from his mother. I recognized the heavy cursive, the scent of her floral perfume pressed into the paper. She said she was deeply saddened by how things had turned out, that a house isn't worth this much damage to relationships, and that family should come before paperwork. Family. As if I'd ever truly been part of theirs. I didn't respond. A few days later, another letter arrived, this one unsigned. No return address. A single sentence scrawled in messy pen across torn notebook paper. You'll regret this when you're old and alone. That one didn't make me laugh, not because it hurt, but because it was so predictable. The oldest threat in the book. As if loneliness were the worst fate a woman could suffer. As if being partnered with someone who slowly drains you is preferable to sleeping peacefully in a room you pay for yourself. I kept the note, filed it with the rest. Let them accumulate like museum pieces. Evidence of what people become when you stop allowing them to feed off your silence. For a moment, I wondered if he'd try showing up at my door again. If he'd appear with some mixture of rage and desperation, demanding answers or access. But he never did. Maybe someone warned him. Maybe he finally understood what it meant to stand on legal ground with nothing solid beneath his feet. I never doubted the case would collapse. There was no legal standing, no history of financial contribution, no documented co-ownership, just entitlement dressed up in family letterhead and secondhand threats. The lawyer called 2 weeks after our response. It's done, he said. They've dropped everything. No counter-arguments, no follow-up. Of course they did, I said. They never had a case, just a story. He paused, then added, if you ever need a restraining order filed, let me know. I've seen these situations turn bitter when the bluff fails completely. I thanked him and hung up. That night, I slept through the entire night for the first time in weeks. No pacing, no phone alerts, no rehearsed responses in my head for attacks that never came. Just quiet. Clean, whole, undisturbed quiet. When people say it's over, they usually mean emotionally. But this was different. This was the end of their reach. No more paperwork, no more veiled threats, No more pretending their opinions had any bearing on my actual life. He and his family could spin whatever story they needed to protect their pride. I wouldn't hear it. I wouldn't correct it. Let them choke on their revised version of events. The truth didn't need defending anymore. It had already won. Selling the house wasn't an emotional decision. It was mathematical. Cold, precise, liberating mathematics. I had equity. I had value. And for the first time in a long time, I was the only one who would benefit from it. The idea started quietly, almost like idle curiosity. I was scrolling through real estate listings one evening, not searching for anything specific, just observing market trends. Then I saw a similar house, 3 blocks away. Same floor plan, smaller yard, slightly outdated kitchen, listed for almost $90,000 more than what I had paid 3 years earlier. I blinked, saved the link, started running numbers in my head. The market had shifted significantly in my favor, and I wasn't emotionally tethered to the space anymore. Every room I walked through now echoed with clean detachment. I'd already extracted the memories I wanted to keep. Everything else was just drywall and decisions. I called a realtor, someone I trusted, someone outside the circle he used to pull social favors from. We met the following week. She walked through the place slowly, taking notes and photos. "You've maintained this beautifully," she said. "Excellent natural light, clean lines, smart improvements. You'll get offers, quick ones." I told her I was ready to move fast. I didn't want to drag out the process. No elaborate staging, no emotional delays. Just clear pricing and the right buyer. Within 4 days of listing, I had 5 offers, all above asking price. That's when it really hit me. How long I'd been sitting on something valuable, trapped in the belief that I couldn't move forward, that I had to stay and maintain and nurture a place that never truly gave back. I wasn't just selling a house. I was liquidating every sacrifice I'd made, every quiet night I'd held things together alone. The final sale closed within 30 days. Clean transaction, no complications, no interference from anyone. When the check cleared, I stared at the number in my account for a long time. It wasn't life-changing money, but it was mine. Completely, unquestionably mine. I didn't rush to spend it. I let it sit untouched for weeks, like a boundary I had drawn in the shape of a bank balance. Proof that something solid could come from years of imbalance. Then I started making lists. Not lists of things I needed, but things I had postponed. For years, I'd told myself certain purchases could wait. A weekend trip to the coast, a new laptop, a photography workshop, a real mattress that didn't feel like a compromise. I'd always prioritized joint expenses, things we might both use, things he might benefit from. Now, I thought only in singular terms. I booked a solo trip to a coastal town I'd bookmarked years ago but never dared visit without him. I upgraded my workspace. I bought fresh linens, a pair of boots I used to admire through shop windows, and new cookware. Nothing extravagant, just mine. Every purchase felt deliberate. Not indulgent, not impulsive, just corrective. I even started a small project I'd shelved indefinitely, something I used to sketch ideas for in old notebooks when I thought I had spare time. I won't describe it in detail. It's still growing, still fragile. But the point is, I made space for it again. Space I'd once filled with someone else's priorities and problems. People around me noticed changes. Coworkers said I seemed lighter. Friends invited me out more often. One of them, someone who used to avoid bringing their partner around when I was still with him, said, "You seem more yourself lately." And I was. Not happier in some magical way. Not dramatically transformed. Just more present. More real. Less edited for someone else's comfort. Freedom didn't look like champagne or revenge plots. It looked like grocery shopping without budgeting for someone else's expensive snacks. Like sleeping diagonally across a bed that I had paid for. Like knowing that no one was quietly draining my energy in the background while I slept. He tried reaching out again, once more. An email this time. Short, polite, carefully worded. He said he'd heard through mutual connections that I'd sold the house. That he hoped everything worked out well. That he was glad things had turned out okay for me. As if he'd been a neutral observer. As if he'd watched our relationship from the sidelines instead of living inside it. I didn't reply. What was there to say? That I was thriving despite his years of passive consumption? That I'd spent half a decade building a life he coasted through, and now I was finally building one for myself alone? No. The best response was no response at all. Let him imagine. Let him guess. Let him wonder. Let him sit with the silence he once mistook for compliance. The truth was elegantly simple. I had monetized what was mine. I had converted the very thing he took for granted into a path forward. I had capitalized on the foundation he believed would always be there, waiting for him. And every time I opened my banking app, every time I added to my savings, every time I funded something that brought me genuine satisfaction, I remembered that joke. Why pay for the cow? He thought he was being clever. He didn't realize I owned the entire pasture. It's been 8 months now. Long enough for people to stop asking careful questions. Long enough for the silence to settle into something comfortable. Long enough for my life to feel like it never had his fingerprints on it at all. The apartment is still compact. Still quiet. But I've made it mine in every way that matters. The walls are lined with books I actually read. The kitchen smells like garlic and fresh herbs most evenings. The plants on the windowsill are not only alive, but thriving. I named them after concepts I no longer practice: patience, apology, compromise. The dog lives with me, of course. He came without question, tail wagging, no loyalty conflicts. I think he adjusted faster than I did. Sometimes he still perks up when he hears footsteps in the hallway, then realizes it's no one we know. And then he goes right back to his nap, the way I do now. I wake up in peace. Not out of obligation, not to carry someone else's emotional weight, just because I'm rested and ready. I stopped checking his social media around month 4. Before that, I used to glance occasionally, curious, not longing, but every post felt like performance art. Gym selfies, memes about loyalty and authenticity, vague quotes about growth and learning from difficult experiences, always carefully curated to suggest he was doing fine, that he was unbothered, that he'd somehow been the victim of someone cold, calculating, ungrateful. His family never posted about me. They never had. It was easier, I'm sure, to pretend I'd been just a phase, a girl who'd overreacted to a harmless joke, a name best left in the past tense, but I know what happened, and so do they. Because the thing about silence is, it doesn't erase facts. It just sits with them. I heard from a mutual contact, someone who doesn't take sides but doesn't lie either, that he's back living at his childhood home. In his old bedroom, same bedspread from high school, same carpet, working freelance projects, supposedly, saving up, trying to get back on his feet, they said. But from where I stand, it looks more like trying to start over without acknowledging he never learned to stand on his own the first time. He still tells people I blindsided him, still calls it a toxic situation, still says I took everything, but I didn't take everything. I left him exactly what was his. That's the part he can't say out loud. Meanwhile, I've moved forward. Not just physically, but in ways that don't translate to social media updates or dinner party stories. I've made new friends, reconnected with old ones who had quietly drifted away during the years I was too busy maintaining an unbalanced relationship. I even started dating again, slowly, carefully, with clear boundaries and realistic expectations. I'm not looking to be rescued, not looking to fill a gap or fix someone else's problems. There is no gap, because I never needed a partner to complete me. I only ever needed one who wouldn't stand in my way. I've been building things again, real things, not based on fantasy or future promises, but substance. I've invested time in myself, in my work, in my voice, in projects that matter to me, and I've learned how to sit with myself without shrinking to make room for someone else. There are days I still revisit the past, not to mourn, but to verify, to remind myself that I wasn't wrong, that what happened was real, that I didn't leave because I was weak or impatient, but because I finally understood that my strength didn't need to be spent on someone who never appreciated it. Sometimes I reread the documentation I kept, not out of spite or vindication, just confirmation, to remember how thoroughly I had prepared, how quietly I had built my exit strategy, how completely I had reclaimed what was mine. I think about the version of me that once believed love meant overextending. That devotion meant debt. That being chosen would eventually come if I just kept being useful enough. She's gone now. What's left is someone calmer, sharper, more deliberate about where I place my energy. I don't need to prove anything. Not to him. Not to his family. Not to anyone who watched it happen and said nothing. I don't need a redemption arc. I didn't fall. I just woke up. And when I think back to that night at his family's table, the joke, the laughter, the wine in my hand that suddenly tasted like vinegar, I don't feel shame or regret. I feel gratitude. Because that moment, humiliating as it was, cracked the illusion so cleanly that I couldn't repair it or ignore it. It was the final gift he didn't mean to give me, the clarity I had been afraid to reach for, the permission to stop waiting. And now? Now I don't need metaphors about milk or cows or pastures. I'm not something free to be consumed. I'm not property to be owned or livestock to be managed. I am the deed. I am the title. I am the entire investment. And I don't graze in anyone's field. I grow my own.